I have been watching almost all of the impeachment hearings so far, um, which is probably not great for my mental health. I think I'm going to need to start to be a bit more selective about how much of it I watch. Um, but I feel like I'm pretty much up to date with the subject matter, and it does seem to me pretty apparent that the House will be impeaching the president. They've got a buffet of options to choose from in terms of impeachable offenses. Um, and I don't think there's, unless something truly unexpected, and I can't even frankly imagine what it would be, comes to light that in some way exonerates the president. Ultimately, I think he ensured the impeachment when they released that summary of the call with the Ukrainian president, because that in itself is Trump asking for a political favor, um, something that's putting his own personal private interests ahead of the national interest and our national security. And just that on its own would have been enough. Um, so although these impeachment hearings are not finished, they will continue. I think the case has already been resolved in the minds of the party in power in the House, which is the Democrats. Now, in the Senate, there seems to be a conventional wisdom that it's going to die a death there. That the Republicans hold, I believe, 53 of the 100 seats, and the only way to remove a president is for 67 of the 100 senators to convict the president and remove him from office. So, with his own party in control of 53 of those 100 seats, people generally assume that it's just not going to happen. There's no chance of it. What I want to sort of mention, though, is that I have a slightly different take on it. I would agree that it's unlikely. However, I think the possibility of it happening is greater than people are suggesting. It's a non-zero possibility, let's put it that way. And the reason I say that is because there's a couple other things coming down the pipeline. You might remember that during all of the Mueller investigation, Russian collusion, what have you, the key star witness for Bob Mueller was Don McGahn, the White House lawyer. And they had four examples of obstruction of justice for which all of the statutory requirements had been met. So it is pretty much a sealed case, but they couldn't get Don McGahn to testify because he refused to comply with the subpoena that was issued by the House. Well, that's about to come to a head suddenly. There's a decision expected next Monday on whether he will be forced to go to the Congress and comply with that subpoena. Now, I have no expectation that this is going to reopen the whole Mueller report Russia can of worms again. But I think on those isolated instances of obstruction of justice, if Don McGahn is finally forced to come to the House and answer to the questions that people have, that brings this whole very serious case of obstruction of justice back against the president. Now, that in and of itself, again, I don't think would seal the deal, but there's something else going on at the moment as well. You may have heard that there is another whistleblower, this time for the IRS. Now, while Donald Trump was not legally obliged to release his tax releases publicly, there is a law that states that once you get elected president, you must submit your tax releases for audit. And this whistleblower at the IRS has said, no, actually, the Trump White House has thrown a monkey wrench in the works and they've prevented the IRS from conducting that audit, which is required. So this has been percolating in the background. It hasn't had a huge amount of news. However, it's worth knowing that this is being investigated currently in the Senate in a bipartisan manner by Chuck Grassley and Ron Wyden, two senators. Grassley is a Republican, and he's the chair of the committee that they both run. So you've got a whole other ball of wax with this conspiracy to do with the White House preventing Donald Trump's tax returns from being audited when they are legally required to be audited. So we're coming to, I don't know if we're at midway point, if we're nearing the end of the impeachment hearings that are going on now, but you've got two other rather big scandals that potentially could be blowing up very soon in the next week or two. The calculation that the Senate will have to make, and Mitch McConnell in the Senate will have to make, is, are they reaching the point where the public is getting fed up and exhausted with all of this, and Trump's numbers start to fall further? They don't have to fall to zero, but they need to fall to the point where the Republicans feel like he's losing some of his base. Mitch McConnell does not want to be in a situation where he's having to choose between protecting President Trump and preserving the Republicans' majority in the Senate and his power, effectively, as the leader of the Senate. If it starts to feel like Donald Trump is going to be an albatross hanging around their neck as they go into the 2020 elections, and that people will be so demotivated to vote for Trump, that will have a knock-on consequence to the Republicans down ballot on running for Senate or the House, then that means that the party is going to, as a whole, is really going to suffer and be cast into the wilderness for a while. McConnell's not going to want that. He's not going to want to surrender his own power in the Senate. And so there is a threshold somewhere in there. People are suggesting if Trump's support with his base dips from where it is, around about 40% now, down into the low 30s, then that changes the calculation, and that it would be in the Senate's best interest, or the Republicans in the Senate's best interest, to take this seriously and to seriously consider removing the president. The other thing to keep in mind is that when this gets to the Senate, and it will, Mitch McConnell's not going to be running this trial. The trial, an impeachment trial in the Senate, is run by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, is generally considered to be a fairly conservative jurist. However, he also is going to want to ensure that he is seen to be independent in this very, very public performance of his role. And that provides Mitch McConnell with a bit of insulation from blame from Trump's base. So if the trial in the Senate is not being run by McConnell, it's being run by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, then if they don't like the outcome, there's someone else to blame. And Mitch McConnell doesn't have to take the full brunt of their anger over it. So my point is, people are saying, well, this whole process is pointless because it's not going to remove Trump from office. I'm saying, hang on, there's a couple things that are about to potentially blow up that'll be very, very bad for the president. And the cumulative effect of all three of these major scandals converging at one time could be enough to persuade the Senate to seriously consider removing the president. We will see. I agree, it's still unlikely, but don't let people tell you it's impossible. If you've learned anything from politics over the last 3 years, it's don't rule anything out. What once seemed impossible no longer does. So that's my thought on this. I appreciate your time. Thank you for listening. Have a good weekend.